What would you say to anyone listening that is wanting to start some sort of endeavor, but they're just stuck? They don't know where to begin. They're overwhelmed. They're just in that holding pattern and they've got a lot of fear. What would you say to them?
There just comes a day where we can't not do it. That's been my experience. I had a good corporate gig. I was paid well, but It was this sense of dissatisfaction, the sense of there's something more for me. There's something more I'm meant to do. And then it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. And I was a single mom with 2 kids, so I was really nervous, but it just got to a point I couldn't not do it. I couldn't not try. There was a piece of advice I got at that time that I would encourage anybody who's been that point to possibly take. It's to get very specific about what's stopping you. And it's almost always a fear of something.
Yeah.
Fear that I won't get enough clients, I won't make enough money, I will look foolish, I will this, I will that. For me, it was, what if this business fails and I'm out on the street, basically, with my girls? And the advice I got was get extremely specific about that fear. What's the worst thing that could happen in excruciating detail? And what I realized for myself at that time was the worst thing that could happen is I could get out there and try to sell and people would say no to it or it would fail. So that worst case scenario, I have marketable skills. I'm a hard worker. I was never going to lose my home, let my girls go hungry, be sitting, living out of our car.
Do you ever struggle to understand and communicate your true worth? This can take a lot of self-awareness, self-reflection, and outside intervention, and we often don't know where to begin. Today I'm speaking to Casey Brown about time management, balancing creativity, pricing challenges, and societal pressures on mental health. Welcome to Move Your Mind, where we uncover why you are holding yourself back from getting the life you want and what to do about it. With the help from high-achieving guests and experts in behavioural science, personal development, and the health and wellness space. Join us if you're ready to move out of your own way toward your ideal self. I'm your host, Nick Brax, and I've been working in the health and wellness space for the last 15 years, helping people find direction and gain the courage to take control of their life. My mission is simple: to help you learn everything that I wish I knew so you can become your ideal self. Lacking guidance, I spent the majority of my youth feeling lost and disempowered, which led to depression, anxiety, low self-esteem, and substance abuse. Looking back, I didn't have the vocabulary to communicate what I was experiencing. And as a man, I didn't resonate with the emotional language used in traditional therapy. I didn't need to talk about my feelings. I needed tangible solutions to guide me toward building a life I was proud of. If you can relate, then this podcast is for you. In this episode, we discuss how you can learn to discover and communicate your true worth. If you're ready to take action and build a stronger mindset, then keep listening. Casey, so great to meet you. I was just saying before, I randomly came across you. I was on LinkedIn, saw your TED Talk and really resonated with it. And you spoke so well about so many different really important topics when it comes to business and entrepreneurship and other areas. So I know how busy you are, so I really appreciate you making the time to sit down here with me today.
Thanks so much for having me, Nick. I'm delighted.
Yeah, really appreciate it. So we might just jump straight into it. I always start the podcast by asking if you can just let our listeners learn a bit more about you. So where you've come from, how you basically got to where you are today, and what you are doing today.
Great. Yeah, sure. It wasn't a very straight path. In other words, what I thought I would be doing is very different than what I'm doing. But I think that many people can relate to that. They don't necessarily have a job that they set out to have when they were 15, 16, 17 years old. When I was very small, I wanted to be an actor. I love entertaining people and making people laugh and convincing people of ideas and being the sort of center of attention when it comes to something I have to say. And it was a lot of fun participating in theater as a kid, but I grew up below the poverty line. Money was a really big struggle for my family, to the tune of, evictions from apartments and not enough to eat. So the path of an actor didn't look like a certainty in terms of a way out of poverty. So I decided acting was maybe not the most practical career. And so I did the next logical thing, which was to become an engineer. So I majored in chemical engineering, and then I double majored in Spanish, and I lived and studied in Spain. And then I went back and got an MBA. So if it sounds like I didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up, it's because I really didn't know, or I suppose I was still wishing I could somehow be an actor. And started my career in corporate America in traditional engineering roles, R&D, manufacturing, stuff like that. But I'm an extrovert. I love people. I have what some people call a big personality. So engineering really ultimately wasn't a great fit for me. I wanted to get out of the lab and get in front of more people, in front of the customer, understand who was buying our stuff, why they care. And so I was working at General Electric at that time, and they were rolling out Six Sigmas. Six Sigma. They were one of the early adopters of that program for making better data-driven decisions to drive your business. And at GE, it was a rotational program, and I did rotations in sales and marketing, and then I did one in pricing. And I kind of fell in love with the discipline. It's an intersection of art and science, people and process, data and psychology. I'd taken econ in college, and I thought pricing was this really mathematical, boring thing. Like, you charge less, you sell more, you charge more, you sell less, like some kind of just a demand curve, but the real world pricing is quite different. There's a lot of mystery. There's a lot of bluffing. It's more like poker. Everybody's trying to assess the strength of their hand and the strength of their opponent's hand. And buyers try to hide how little they're willing to accept, sellers try to hide how little they're willing to accept, and buyers try to hide how much they're willing to pay. And so this is who's the better bluffer? And so that kind of mysterious, vague, gray thing really kind of captured my attention. And I've built the last 20 plus years of my career around pricing in business. And that has taken a lot of different forms. I was a pricing manager in corporate America and did some other kind of pricing roles, pricing leadership roles inside of other large companies. But about 15 years ago, started my own pricing training and consulting firm with the belief that it shouldn't only be the large corporations that have access to expertise when it comes to strategic pricing and good price execution. And we offer a bunch of different services, but where my love remains is staring into the eyes of men and women every day who pour their hearts out for quality and service and excellence and are being under rewarded for that. And so I have a real passion, a real mission to help people realize their true potential in the form of higher prices, higher salaries, whatever that looks like, so that they can get the value they're worth.
Yeah, it's such a confusing area to learn about, because it's just this intangible thing where most of us just are flying by the seat of our pants and don't really know how to do it. And there's fear if you overcharge that you won't get the work. And how do you find that sweet spot? So I'm so interested to dive into some questions around that, but also thank you for sharing that story. And I really love that, and how you, and to me, it almost feels full circle as well, where, you have this interest. You have this interest in acting, and then you end up doing the public speaking. And I can relate to that so much, because I came from an entertainment background, and then my career ended up being in public speaking, and sort of would have never imagined it to go through all these, different iterations. But I think if you stay true to yourself, eventually that sweet spot will emerge, and all of those skill sets, and, like you're saying, you have that larger than life personality, you're meant to be on a stage, and somehow you wind up on that. But if you sat down and tried to orchestrate that from day one, how on earth would you do it? It's like you have to just get out there and put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah, you've nailed it. I was just keynoting a conference last week with 600 people in the audience, and when I say something and they laugh, or I make a key conceptual point and I see people sort of scurry in for their pen to write it down, it feeds that part of me that always wanted to be on stage, and I am. I'm not in plays and movies, but I'm still impacting people through performance. And so it's to your point, the path might not be very linear, but if you stay sort of committed to core values and align that with what you're great at, I think you'll find an unexpected way to the path that I found, which is I'm doing stuff I love, that I'm quite good at, that helps people, and that's the dream. That's the dream job.
Exactly. And you could argue that, being on a stage and sharing the information you're sharing is probably making more impact than if you were performing in a play or in a film or whatever it was. And I was actually having this conversation with my girlfriend the other day, and sort of saying, I sort of was devaluing what I'm doing and wishing that I had the time or had the career in film and TV that I was sort of on the path for. And then had that realization that, well, hang on, all that stuff you're craving, you're getting to do this on a stage in front of people, sharing information that you believe in that, is hopefully helping people. It's sort of looking at what's in front of us a lot of the time and making the most of that, which I think, would you think that's something a lot of us can get caught up in with the world we live in now, and comparison, social media, looking for the next best thing, not valuing, what we have and making the most of that, and then going on just a tangent that, and getting overwhelmed because we lose that focus?
I think you're bringing up such an important point, and I know that lots of other entrepreneurs. I'm in different kind of peer groups and mastermind groups with other entrepreneurs, and certainly entrepreneurs get caught up in this. But I think it's not just entrepreneurs where it's what is enough? What does enough look like? And where does satisfaction in life really come from? And this is something, certainly I have a different idea in my late 40s than I did in my late 30s or late 20s or late teens. And I might have another, more refined idea of this 10 years from now. But I think that how one measures success is a really important part of the conversation we're having. So, perfect example, you mentioned that, from the stage, I have the ability to maybe make even a bigger impact than if I had, stayed on this kind of theater path. The kind of organizations that bring me to do keynotes, but also the kind of companies that help us to hire them. These are, full of companies that are, small and medium-sized businesses. Somebody who maybe, them or their father or their grandmother or somebody started a business. Now they're, first, second, third generation of that business. They may have 10, 15, 20, 50 employees. So when I can make a meaningful difference in, something which seems as maybe, exclusively business focused as pricing execution, what that generates is a lot of, very real financial resources for that organization. And now what that means is they're paying out a profit sharing plan, and now somebody's kid gets hockey skates, or they're able to make an extra house payment, or they're, paying ahead on their daughter's college tuition. So there's a real ripple effect of being able to affect people's business through the kind of work I do, the kind of work you do, in a way that affects people in a very real and special way. And for me, that's essential. I don't travel as much now as I once did, but when I first started this business, I was on 20 to 30 planes a month, missing my kids. My babies were at home. I traveled less, but still, the dollars in and of themselves aren't enough to put me on the road missing my kids. But connecting with human beings who care exquisitely about the value of what they're putting out into the world and seeing that go under rewarded, it fires me up. So that's what gives me the fire and the belly to keep going. And back to your original question, like that's a measure of success for me.
Yeah, which it's super inspiring. And so I guess, would you say for anyone listening, in terms of, because that's something that is so hard to deal with, especially if you are ambitious and you're wanting to do a lot in the world, there is no point where it's enough. And our brain will trick us into thinking when we get to this level or make this much money or whatever the hell it is, but you can't win if you do that. So would you say it's reframing that, sort of like what you're talking about there, into making the goal not anything to do with the tangible sides of, how much money I make, how much fame, whatever it is, but more how much impact can I make in this, whatever I'm doing today, even if it's helping one person, how much impact can I make? Because if you think that way, you're going to be able to enjoy the process and be present in what you're doing and not have that, yuck, overwhelming feeling of always trying to prove yourself.
Yeah. There's two important things I want to say in response to that. So you're dead on. One important thing is to acknowledge that, and I know this because I've been on the other side of this, that I have the financial stability to have the privilege of pursuing a career that makes a big impact, and that I am allowed to chase what I value, and I'm allowed to determine what's enough because I'm not hungry and I have a roof over my head, and me and my kids are safe. And I think it's number one important to sort of pull yourself over and recognize if you're choosing between a lot of great options of how you can work and measure your success, then you already have a lot of privilege over so many folks in the world. And the reason I mention that is that one of the best ways to drive real satisfaction is gratitude. Real clear awareness of all the the benefit that you already have in your life. And, one of the ways I stay present to that is I do a lot of volunteerism, and I certainly like to make a difference with my volunteerism, but I would be lying if I didn't say there was a selfish benefit, which is that it really helps keep me grounded on how good I have it. So that's one thing I want to say in response to your question. The second thing is, you kind of asked, is making an impact a good way to measure that? I would say yes, if you care about that. I do, and you do. I don't think somebody's wrong or bad if that isn't something that really drives them. But the reframing is critical. And there's an author and a leader in the business thought leadership community named Dan Sullivan. He started Strategic Coach. You may have heard of him, but he wrote a book and came up with a concept called the gap and the gain. And the idea behind that is that many of us entrepreneurs, most commonly, certainly, but plenty of other folks too, are constantly measuring ourselves against where we want to be, and because we're ambitious and we drive hard, as soon as we get there, that's no longer the yardstick anymore. In other words, we're chasing a horizon line we can never catch. And that can generate a real feeling of dissatisfaction, failure, discontent, not measuring up, even to one's own yardstick, much less a comparison to someone else. And it could be about the impact you have on others. It could be about money. It could be about how many lives you touch through a nonprofit organization, whatever your measure is. The comparison to that, the sort of contrast to that, is instead of measuring the gap between where I am and where I want to go, I measure myself between where I am and where I was. In other words, the gain. Like, look at what has been accomplished. Looked at the lives I've touched. Look at the benefits I've been able to generate in these businesses. Look at the profitability we've been able to help people have. Look at the amount of money we've been able to make that we can now donate to nonprofits. So I have my own yardsticks, but I think the real key distinction for me there is a transformation between measuring myself against some theoretical future state, which frankly is impossible because I will always chase another horizon, and measuring myself against 1 quarter ago, 1 year ago, 1 decade ago, 1 day ago, and see that real good is being done through our work.
Yeah, I love that answer, because if you have that gratitude and just look at your personal progress, you won't have a choice but to feel positive about what's happened, because you're going to see that progress, and we could easily dismiss that. And I think that's so important what you're talking about there with, where I was talking about, we could measure it on impact or whatever it is. Even within that, it's easy to then get competitive with that and look at other people that, how come I'm not making as much impact as that person? And it turns into another version of the same thing. So if we're not careful, we can easily fall into those patterns in pretty much any way we look at it, unless it does come back to what you're talking about there, just being grateful, grounding ourselves. And I think that's a really beautiful point as well, what you made with the charity work, going and like admitting that, there's almost always also selfish reasons. I think if we can all look at it that way, if that encourages us all to get involved and help out in different areas, we will feel better. That's a great motivation. So I think we should try and be selfish about that.
Yeah, I don't think there's any need to apologize for feeling good about doing good.
No.
In fact, Abraham Lincoln once said, "When I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. And that is my religion." And I've always been really inspired by that. And as it pertains to philanthropy and volunteerism, if someone gets a personal benefit out of doing good in the world, more power to them. I don't think that in any way diminishes or dilutes the impact. And if that it reinforces someone to do more good in the world, then great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love it. That's such a great point. What would you say to anyone listening that is wanting to go on their own entrepreneurial path or start some sort of endeavor, but they're just stuck? They don't know where to begin. They're overwhelmed. They're just in that holding pattern, and they've got a lot of fear. What would you say to them? Where can they begin?
That's an excellent question with no real simple answer. But I think that people who do what you've done and what I've done, what millions and millions of others have done of starting a business, I think there just comes a day where we can't not do it. That's been my experience. I was, had a good corporate gig. I was paid well. I had, insurance, and not to brag, but they paid me every 2 weeks on the regular, and I had I had a corporate car. I mean, I had a really cushy gig. but it was the sense of dissatisfaction, the sense of there's something more for me, there's something more I'm meant to do, had been there. And then it grew and it grew and it grew and it grew. And I don't know if you've ever had this experience, maybe before you started your own thing, but if you're around other entrepreneurs, it's like a cult. They want you to join. They just won't shut up about it. It's like, Nick, you got to start man, you got to take this on the road. You got to do. And that's, I have a brother who was an entrepreneur before me, and he wouldn't shut up about it. Like, oh, you got to do this. You got to do this. You got to do this. And I was pretty risk averse because of the, kind of poverty background, and scared I wasn't going to be able to make it. And I was a single mom with 2 kids, and, didn't have a safety net. My family doesn't have any, they can't swoop in and save me if I mess this up. And so I was really nervous, but I think it just got to a point I couldn't not do it. I couldn't not try. And there was a piece of advice I got at that time that I would encourage anybody who's kind of in that point to possibly take. It's, I'm not the author of it, but it's essentially to get very specific about what's stopping you. And it's almost always a fear of something.
Yeah.
Fear that I won't get enough clients, I won't make enough money, I will look foolish, I will this, I will that, who knows what. They have a fear, or a set of them. And I did too. For me, it was, what if this business fails? And, I'm, out on the street basically with my girls. And the advice I got was, get extremely specific about that fear. What's the worst thing that could happen? Like, in excruciating detail. And what I realized for myself at that time was, the worst thing that could happen is I could, sort of hang out my shingle as a consultant, get out there and try to, sell it, and people would say no to it, or basically that it would fail. I would be in a financial hole. Like, I would burn through savings, maybe go into debt, and have to go get another crappy job. And guess what? I already had one of those. So that worst case scenario, like, I have marketable skills. I'm a hard worker. I was never going to lose my home, let my girls go hungry, be sitting, we're living out of our car. I think before the specificity of that exercise, I had some of those vague catastrophic things in my mind. Like, I'm ruining our lives if I mess this up. And without really having any real shape around that ruination, it was a fear that stopped me. And when my very specific exercise led me to realize, like, okay, I'd be maybe a financial year behind where I otherwise would be in terms of, when I could have enough money to retire. That is a terrible reason not to try, because I'm smarter than some folks out there running successful businesses. I'm a hard enough worker as some folks out there successfully running businesses. So was I certain of it? No. And to be honest with you, it was harder than I thought it would be. But here I am 15 years later with a business I'm really proud of, and that is successful, profitable, thriving, helping a lot of businesses. And I think back to that time, and I'm an engineer, so of course I did this all on a spreadsheet, calculating out pros and cons and everything. But that specificity around really naming the fears helped me have the courage to take the leap.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying this podcast, please click the subscribe button, leave a like or comment, share with your friends, and follow me on Instagram at Nick Brax. I really appreciate your ongoing support. Yeah, that's so powerful. I really love that, because our mind is so powerful, and our imagination can go to places that are often not bedded in reality, and it's scary to even try and confront those thoughts. But when you do it, you get that liberation, and you sometimes you just need to map it out, and it's not a natural tendency to want to do that. But I think it's just so inspiring, and the fact that you could go and do that, being in a comfortable job, single mum with kids, everyone always says that you can't do that. You should, try and do these sort of passion projects, or if you want to be an entrepreneur or start a business, do that in your early 20s, because you won't be able to later on in life. And that drives fear, because then you feel like, well, okay, I've got this tiny window. What if it doesn't work? And you'll probably make mistakes because of that. So I think just removing all of these different limiting beliefs and getting to the core of it. And would you say a big part of that as well is what other people are feeding us? Because I know from myself, so many people, the experience, even your parents, friends, people around you, all out of protection, and maybe some of it out of their own insecurities, telling you not to do things. That can be really hard if you're not getting clear on where that's coming from.
100%. So, I shared that I grew up in a below the poverty line. Blue collar family. My dad was a truck driver. My mom stayed home with us, constantly deciding if we're going to be able to afford to buy groceries or pay the electric bill. And so their constant refrain, their repeated mantra my entire childhood was go get an education. It's your ticket out of this kind of life. And so I was like, okay, great. And so I did that. I got, I figured out where I could go to school that I could get scholarships because we couldn't pay for it. Right. I took these really smart steps and took this really smart path. But then when it was time that I was in that kind of cycle of disillusionment inside the corporation, and I was talking to my parents about leaving, to them, this looked like the most foolish decision ever. To them, I had it made. I was set. Yeah. Once I got graduated from college and got a good corporate job with a nice salary and security, to them, and some of this is generational, right? Because a generation and 2 generations ago, it was much more common for people to get a job and work there until they retired. It's very uncommon now, obviously, but for them, not only was I looking at moving from one secure thing to another, I was sort of throwing away this secure thing and leaping out into the void. And I think, their fears were then sort of projected on me, and it came from a place of love, absolutely, and concern for me, but they knew they couldn't financially help me out of a hole if I dug one for myself. And so, worrying about that, a lot of folks, and I mentioned I was a single mom. What that means is I did not have to convince a spouse or a partner that this was a good idea. And I think that that's one of the things that stops a lot of folks too, is that they see they have something special, valuable, or different to offer the world, but they're not just taking a risk with themselves. And I wasn't either. I was taking it with my daughters, but they didn't get a vote. They were babies, So if you've got your wife, your husband, your partner to get, you're taking a big risk with other people's lives. And I don't minimize the impact of that decision, but you've got to manage not only your own fears, but the fears of other people that care about you. It's a real challenge. I think, I come back to that specificity thing. I think not just about starting a business, but any other big risk we're afraid to take in life. It's like there's a monster under the bed and we're scared. But I think, get out the flashlight, shine that light under there. Like maybe the claws aren't that sharp and it doesn't have that many teeth. I'm ready to wrestle with the monster. And I've learned through successfully confronting some pretty big risks that on the other side of that is something greater that's ever possible by just staying in the bed under the covers.
Yeah. No, I love that. And I mean, another thing I'm interested in is how do you manage your time and sort of keep balance? Because, if you're raising kids, you're doing talks, you're traveling, you're running a business, it's a lot of responsibilities. And I think this is another thing from personal experience, and for a lot of entrepreneurs, we get overwhelmed and find it very hard to switch off, find it hard to find balance. How do you manage that with all of the different things happening in your life?
I hope you won't regret asking me this, so you can always edit it out. But the short answer is pretty abysmally. Managing my time is
that makes me feel better.
Yeah, well, good. I think, it's rooted in a foolish optimism that many entrepreneurs have, that I can do all this stuff. I can take on everything. Yes, I can. I constantly overestimate how many things fit on my plate. I constantly underestimate how long it will take to do them with excellence. I overcommit all the time. And I have tried every time blocking system under the sun. If there's a book about it, I have read it. I've attempted a lot of different systems, and I am also kind of classic visionary entrepreneur. I don't love systems. Even as an engineer, don't put a system on me. I can't be contained, right? So I'm using a system now. It's called the Entrepreneurial Time System. It's also a creation of Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach. And it's working better than any other system I've ever used, but I would be completely disingenuous and maybe to the point of lying if I said it was working particularly well for me, because I continue to break my own rules. I have someone that manages my calendar for me, thankfully. It's the only reason I ever show up to anything on time. But I all the time break the rules I set for him when he's managing my calendar. I said, on Thursday, I only want to do this. And then I'll come to him and say, hey, schedule a meeting for me on Thursday with Nick, or, whatever. And you said not to do that. So I have my team and my systems all designed to kind of contain the chaos that I otherwise create. And I'm still leaking chaos, even in face of those systems. But I'm working on it. it's an evergreen goal of mine to get better at managing my time, and not necessarily because I want to accomplish more so because I want to feel satisfied with what I accomplished. And it goes
Yeah.
back to that enough feeling. Like no matter how much I work, and I love my work, I don't necessarily want to stop at the end of the day, but I got to go, pick up my kids from rehearsal or whatever it is. Um, However much I work and however much I accomplish, there's this sort of vague sense of, oh gosh, but I got to get that proposal out and I really need to call that. So it's kind of back to that earlier conversation we had, which is where, what's enough look like? And why I'm still really committed to having a transformation about time management is that is probably the one area of my life that I still feel like I'm measuring myself in the gap, not the gain.
Yeah, well, it's very refreshing to hear because I'm similar where it's just such an unnatural thing. Want to just do things, not think about it, not have any systems around. Just it's so frustrating having to follow processes, but it's a necessary evil. So I guess that I think it's such an important point you're saying there of having people that can assist with that while you're working on it, and I guess a lot of those entrepreneurial traits are probably what have made you excel as well because you think in that way. So that's often going to come with a lack in that planning area
Right.
or whatever it is. But we all have something to work on, but so we can improve it. But in the meantime, we can find a way to build a team around us to help with our weaknesses, because everyone's going to have some sort of weakness, which is important in every area of business.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll happen to me all the time where I'll be talking to a client or something and I'll just get this inspiration like, that would make a great blog. I need to remember to make a video about that because companies really need to know this. And I'll scribble myself a note. I'm a big fan of Post-its. I have them all over my desk. And then as soon as I hang up, what do I want to do? I want to immediately create that piece of content because I'm very excited about it. I'm full of inspiration about it. But what I have to do is get with my team to let them know that we got to get a proposal out for this and I've got to run to another meeting. And so the sort of constraints of normal schedule management feel very like almost like a straitjacket sometimes to my creativity and my inspiration. And then when I get time later, I'm like, I don't know if I really want to do that anymore. So I think that, one of the benefits of the way I'm currently structuring my schedule, and I'd like to do even more of it, is just to create bigger blocks of unscheduled, unplanned, unscripted. So it's not for a purpose. It allows me to sort of be a thinker, be a creator. And the degree to which those times are kind of held on my calendar as sacred, I think make me a better leader to the team, certainly, and able to make a bigger contribution because I can never make as big of a contribution if I'm, meeting with one client or on one stage as I can if I'm really generating something truly novel that hasn't existed before in the world, that if we put that out, then that can help certainly all the people that pay us for the work, but also all the other people that connect with us, people that, download our free resources or are connected with us on LinkedIn. And all those folks are out there trying to figure out how to make their way with pricing. And that's what we know. So it's very rewarding to me to be able to protect some creative time and hard to do.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't generate tomorrow's dollar, right? Or it doesn't serve tomorrow's client. And so the tyranny, the urgent, is often the enemy of the long-term creation.
Exactly. That's been my entire sort of adult life, navigating the two things, the natural tendency to want to only do creative things, only think big picture, and just, having sort of a disregard for all the in-between. And
this email isn't going to answer itself, Nick. That's not how that works.
Yeah, exactly. This proposal won't send itself. The email won't send itself.
Right.
It just they're not fun things to do, but they're part of the process. But I think, like you're saying there as well, I think I love that point you made where you can have that. It almost feels like mania in the moment of, I've got this idea, I want to do it right now, and you're so inspired. And so many times I have that exact experience you're talking about where I'll feel that and I'll just pull myself out of it and say, okay, I'll do it later on or tomorrow when I've got time, but let's just get this stuff done now. And then you look back and you realize, actually, it's not really maybe fitting in with what we're trying to work on at the moment. And it's just so hard to juggle that because we need both. I think we can, and this is another thing I was interested to ask you. in that sort of process of juggling that, have you had periods where you've overcompensated and gone the other way, where it's only been about just the productivity based things that take you out of being able to think big picture, which you're probably naturally, inclined to do? Because I found for a while I majorly overcompensated until I got used to sort of finding that balance and
Yeah.
learned that skill.
Absolutely. I think, to be perfectly blunt, I'm probably never managing that balance very well. I'm always too heavy on one or too heavy on the other. And some of that is, I think, the maturation or evolution of the business. So when I started the company, it was just me, myself, and I made the website, and I made the business cards, and I did the email, and I scheduled my meetings, and I, took out the trash. I had all the roles. I was the marketing department, the HR department, the everything, right? And so sales and delivery and finance and all of that. And as we've grown our team, and we're still not a very big company, there's only 8 of us, but as I've grown the team and handed off some of those responsibilities to people who are frankly better at many of those things than I am,
Mm.
there has grown complexity of running a business that wasn't there when it was me doing all the things. And frankly, a challenge I love and enjoy. I'm really excited about the role of business leader and owner, not just the role as pricing expert. And it's
Hmm.
a new, fun, interesting challenge for me. But because it's, and I say new, the last several years, but I feel like I could do this for the rest of my life and still be a student of business and what business, really good business, looks like. But
Yeah.
it has pulled me at times almost exclusively into more of the doing and being
Yeah.
in the business, and in some cases, because we were growing really quickly and we didn't have the systems and processes in place yet, and so we're kind of holding together client engagements with duct tape and baling wire, right? Like just, let's make sure the client is happy and we'll figure everything else out later.
Yeah.
And that takes some heroic effort by me and others on the team to get that done, as we're kind of growing, very quickly. And so there have been times when I feel like there's no time to kind of come up to 10,000 feet and look around and really contemplate the business, the content, the future, what, trends I see in the environment and the economy that I want to make sure that we're reflecting in our content. So, um, absolutely, that tension is probably my number one thing that I feel like, on a sort of a personal level as well as a leader level, could make a really big difference in both my satisfaction, but also my ability to contribute, is to get better at managing that balance and how I feel about it.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, because this is such a common thing where, you're an expert in one area, in the pricing area, and then you build a company, and running that business is a different skill set in itself. So then you have two disciplines that you're trying to concurrently manage, and one of them can take you away from the other until you can find the balance to manage both. But I think understanding that, and understanding that these are different skills that we can learn, and we can eventually learn how to do both at once, but it's just that learning curve of understanding, okay, there's going to be a new learning curve. I'm going to have to understand the world of business. How do I scale a company? How do I put processes in place? And all of these different things that take time. And like you said, we can never master it. Like anything, it's going to be an ongoing process, but just finding that balance.
Yeah, absolutely.
So with pricing, what is a common misconception, I guess, that people have? Because to me, it's so confusing in the sense of, yeah, how do you work out what your value is? It seems like you're plucking an ambiguous number out of thin air. I've had this, I guess, for example, with my public speaking, trying to work out. In the past, I was worried, am I going to lose talks if I price it too high? So I kept it low, and then I was doing a lot of them, and I got burnt out, and then I sort of, and then I didn't know how high to price it, and yeah, how do you? It's so confusing.
100%, which is, good job security for me, because I think, frankly, most businesses struggle with this. And in your, just to use the keynote talk as an example, that's a space with a lot of pricing variability. In other words, there's plenty of people that'll show up and speak for free, and there are people that charge more than $100,000 per talk, right? And everything in between. And so there's a ton of subjectivity. And there's a number of different things that go into the mindset of somebody who's selling a service like a keynote talk, which is also that if they say no to you. They're not just saying no to this topic or this concept. It can feel very personal. They're saying no to me, to Nick Brax, to Casey Brown, to whoever, right? And so this speaks to the reality that fear is a huge part of pricing decision making in the world. I believe that most pricing decisions are made from fear, not from confidence. We mostly price not to lose work rather than pricing to win it. And the inevitable consequence of that is we're not fairly rewarded for what we're contributing. And I say this as a person who's an expert in this space, but I got to eat my own cooking. You heard it in the TED Talk. I talked about kind of coming to awareness that I was selling our services too cheaply and increasing those prices. So, this is an evergreen area of improvement for every business that I know. I think that it's a very tough question to answer about the value, but if you sell, I don't know, you sell, dry erase markers, your ability to understand what else is out there and what other people are charging is more relevant than if you're selling, a painting or a keynote talk, right? And there's this sort of spectrum of, or like your, marketing services firm and websites, you can get somebody to build you a website for $500 or 500,000, right? And so regardless of the end of the spectrum you're on, whether there's like a very big variation in the pricing and the differentiation, or a much more kind of market driven, competitive driven, there is a lot of fear around pricing. And almost always that leads to underpricing. And so then the question is, where's the cliff? Where's the point where I push it too far? And without talking to an individual business about their individual circumstances, you about your keynote, and getting into a lot more detail, it's hard for me to give some general advice about where that cliff is. And so the only thing I will say is it's further away than you think. And especially as it comes to something like selling keynote talks, to your point, you did them too cheaply, you did too many of them, you got burnt out, right? If your only mission is to speak to as many people as possible, then who cares about getting paid, right? That is not the situation 99.9% of the world is in. We have to care about getting paid for it too. And so then the question is, how do you tune your number so that you achieve your goals, right? And so there is no perfect answer. There is no right price. There's no right price for you for your keynotes. There's no right price for the dry erase marker manufacturer. There's a right price for a given opportunity at a given time. You're always going to be too cheap for some people. You're always going to be too expensive for other ones. Some of them are going to hire you as a keynote speaker, and you're going to leave there and they're going to be like, we'd have paid that guy twice as much. He crushed it. That was amazing. You have other folks that think you're unbelievable and would love to have you, but the second you give them the price, they're like, we have a budget that's 1/10 of that. We could never hire you. And it's not because they don't like you or believe in you, but it just doesn't align. What I'm saying is there's no perfect price. And so the question is, how do you choose pricing that aligns to your goals? And your goals can be profit, revenue, reach. They can be a lot of different things. But I think that, for a person who in a fundamental way is selling time, you could do, make up two numbers here. You could do 10 talks at 10,000 and make 100, or you can do 20 talks or 5 talks at 20,000 and make 100. And so it's like one of those, you're sleeping in your bed twice as much and not being on the road. Right. So I think that especially when it comes to selling time, it's really worth doing that kind of calculation and saying, okay, maybe I will lose some talks, but I want to choose the right ones. And I can always make it an exception when the right one comes along if they don't have the budget, but I'd rather work less and make a bigger impact. The other thing I'll say, and this is especially true on that more differentiated end of the spectrum, is that price is a signal of quality and worth. And so if you're too cheap, then they think you're not that good, right? And so if they're, looking to book Tony Robbins and Brene Brown and Patrick Lencioni and, let's bring Nick Brax, and it's like, this guy he's not the same caliber of speaker. People conclude things like that from the price tag. It's a signal of quality. And so, the only piece of advice I'd have there as it relates to this question is don't be suspiciously cheap. You'd never eat at a 99-cent shrimp buffet, you wouldn't. There was a woman, and I'm in a Facebook group for my neighborhood. People post about, different things. And someone posted in there that she was the cheapest babysitter in town. And I thought that is the most dreadful marketing campaign ever. Like, your people turning over their children to you, they don't care about saving 50 cents an hour, right? And so, the seed I would plant for you and your listeners is that we send a signal of quality with our pricing. We can be suspiciously cheap, or, and I love this phrase, reassuringly expensive. And
Yeah.
and and
Yeah.
think about what kind of signal you're sending. And think about what your real
Yeah.
goals are. Do the math, make a data-driven decision, not a fear-driven one. And the world's your petri dish. Nobody knows what anybody will pay you until you start getting out there and trying it and tuning the number.
Yeah, yeah, that's so interesting, and yeah, there's going to be no concrete answer until you try it. So I guess it goes back to what you're talking about earlier of confronting these fears and looking at it where often it'll be analyzing, oh, but if I change the pricing, I'm going to lose X amount of money, and being able to pull yourself out of that and not look at that as lost money, but look at it as what the potential is. Because I think that's such a difficult thing to pull yourself out of in the short term, seeing dollars that you're going to probably lose on,
Yeah.
but being able to make that decision for the greater sort of longer term vision.
Well, I think that there's a very important risk that people ignore when they do that calculus and they're looking at the risk of lost revenue, lost dollars, is that they're already living out the risk of the status quo, which is underpricing,
Yeah.
and how many dollars
Yeah.
they're leaving on the table if they're underpricing. And I think that is one of the greatest under-realized, underrepresented risks that we're already actually living out every single day that we underprice. I think, there's a lot of things, and this is, we could have an hour podcast, we could have a week-long podcast, we could have a year-long podcast, and not get into everything that makes good pricing decisions good. But I think that, other factors that kind of come to play are how many, what I would call at-bats do you get, right? So if you've got a chance to sell 30 keynotes a year, that's very different than somebody who sells on Amazon and has 580 transactions per hour, right? And so the risk of one lost deal is very different for you than it is for that person who sells product on Amazon. There's also a question of recency of purchase and frequency of purchase. So if somebody's buying, 100 tons of, tonnage steel from a company every week, and they change that price, that's going to have a more meaningful impact than if you change your keynote fee, because who hired you for your last keynote is not the same organizations that are going to hire you for the next one. So your ability to be more dynamic with your pricing, giving that recency and frequency of purchase question, is very different from a company who has that as a factor. So it's very situational. So I'm not trying to duck the question, but I do believe most anybody who sells anything would benefit by locking themselves in a room for an hour a week with a notebook and thinking a little bit more strategically about their pricing. Most people, I do an exercise in my keynote where I ask people to think about how much time they spent in the last week thinking about thinking about selling. Everything to do with demand generation, getting more customers, securing business, getting more business with existing customers. How many hours do they spend on that? And I ask them to scribble it down. And then I say, okay, on these sort of fulfillment of the promise side of the operations, the execution, the delivery, the manufacturing, the design work, the engineering, whatever it is you do, how much of your time did you spend on that? And I have them write that down, and I make a cheesy joke that now 200% of their week is already gone, right? But then the inevitable next question is, how many hours did you spend last week on strategic pricing? And, there's this sort of struck silence in the room, because the answer for everybody but like 2 or 3 guys is 0 hours. I spent 0.
Yeah.
Not to say that I didn't think about my margins or I didn't price out a proposal, but from a strategic perspective, how much are you really looking at your value and how customers value, and whether your pricing is commensurate with that value? And for just about every business on the planet, it's not enough. And so the very simplest piece of advice I can give to every business, every leader, every entrepreneur out there who's listening to this is spend 1 hour thinking about your pricing, and some magic will happen. It'll be the most profitable hour of your week.
Yeah, that's such great advice, and it's so true. We just don't put the time aside to think about it. And like you're saying, this is something we could probably talk about for hours. So I've just got one final question on this. Is it common when you're pricing, I've had this in businesses that I've been involved in, when you're trying to put a price on that and you want to put it at a higher price, but you're looking at these gigantic companies that are out there that are charging a lower fee and they're offering so much more and they've got so much resource, you can sort of logically think to yourself, well, Why is anyone going to pay for mine when they've got this bigger corporation that does all of this for cheaper? Like, how can I justify this? And there's that just lack of confidence in it, in doing it. Is that common?
Yes, every kind of lack of confidence is common. The question I would ask for someone who's asking that to me is, what do you do that's different, special, or valuable than that corporation can't do or won't do? And if the answer is nothing, then you cannot charge more and get, other than maybe your friend or your brother-in-law that's going to buy something from you, but you will not be competitive in the marketplace if you don't solve a problem. Pricing cannot happen in a vacuum. It happens only in the face of value. And so very often, if you're talking about a very large established competitor, who's got tons of resources and tons of existing legacy client business, and you're trying to establish yourself in a market, I would always ask, what do people hate about doing business with that company? Sometimes, and here's one simple example, sometimes with very large companies, people feel sort of like a number, or they're a little fish in a big pond. And with you, they can be a big fish in a little pond, and they can get a level of tailored service and support and attention and responsiveness that they may not be able to get at the big company, even if they have great products and services. That when they call customer service, today they talk to Jim, and next week they talk to Sarah, and the week after that they talk to Joe. And every single time they're like, what's your customer number? Because they've never heard of you. Whereas when they call it, this small company that's in their backyard, it's like, oh, hey, Billy, how's your week going? How was your daughter's weekend or your daughter's wedding last weekend? That's so great. What can I do to help you out? And that's a simple example of that people can usually latch onto when I get that kind of question. But there are often lots of things that are different and special that those large companies can't necessarily compete on. I think it's equally important to be really realistic about the things that they can do better than you and the resources they have available that you don't, because nobody is aided by some kind of fantastical appreciation of our value. We have to be rooted in reality. So we can't overemphasize the differences that are in our favor and underemphasize the differences that are in theirs. But far more common is the opposite problem, which is we sit there with a dramatic lack of confidence because we look at this big competitor and we think we can't compete. So I think it's really important to just be realistic and comprehensive with our differentiation efforts.
Yeah, that's super helpful. Well, I could keep asking you so many questions, and I've loved this conversation. I've taken so much out of it. And I know our listeners will get so much out of this. So I really appreciate your time. We finish with 5 closing questions every episode. These can be quick answers, whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
The first one is, what's your best childhood memory that comes to mind?
Being in the back of the car with my brothers on the way home from my dad took us to the horse races, which is its own thing, I suppose. But I remember riding back from the horse races with my brothers in the back, and we were in the most silly mood, and we fought plenty as kids. But this particular memory, we were giggling like crazy and doing voices, and it just fills me with warmth when I think of that memory. Just my brothers mean the world to me, and it we've been through everything together, and so that's the answer.
Thank you for sharing out. Yeah, I love those kind of memories. What do you think is currently the biggest burden on mental health in society?
Goodness sakes, too much. Just too much, too much, too fast. And you can throw social media in there for sure, but I think it's just an overwhelm to our systems from the second we wake up to the second we go to bed.
Yeah. What's your personal definition of happiness?
Love of family, love of friends, love of humanity. Love brings happiness.
So true. What's your biggest fear?
That is an excellent question. I would have to say, I like many have stories and maybe even baggage that persist from childhood, and had a pretty scary set of circumstances sometimes in my childhood. And I think that this sort of a scarcity feeling of like, I don't have enough, and I'm gonna, like, I think it's almost like an existential threat. Like I could die if I don't have enough. It's just very interesting considering the conversation we just had and the plentiful abundance that's possible with pricing. But maybe I ended up here as an ultimate triumph over trying to conquer the scarcity of my childhood.
Yeah, it's and it's just, there's so many layers to that, and it's a lifelong thing. But I think being able to acknowledge it and move forward despite it is such a powerful thing.
Thanks.
So, final one, what are you most proud of?
The easy answer, which is true, is my children. And also, I think that there are some things that I've that I've done that are different than maybe other parents. And so I guess specifically as a triumph over my childhood is to be an example for my kids that they can do what they want to do and be what they want to be. And that I've pursued that even though there were costs to them. I mean, I said I was on the road when they were little, and that's true. And so I think um, being able to show them a path of my own choosing, and with the idea that they can choose their path.
Well, yeah, I think that's the greatest gift that you can give to your kids, to show them that, and lead by example. And you've definitely inspired me, and I'm sure everyone listening will be inspired. And yeah, really appreciate you sharing all of this. So finally, where can we send our listeners if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, great. So our website is boostpricing.com, easy peasy. And there's a contact form if anybody wanted to reach out and get a hold of us. But I'm also on LinkedIn, which is where I put a lot of videos and blogs and content. And my handle there is Casey Brown Boost.
Great. Well, we'll have the links in the show notes, so make sure to check it out. And Casey, thank you again for making the time.
Thank you, Nick. It was a real pleasure. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Casey Brown, for joining me today and offering your insights. And thank you for listening. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the episode and any suggestions for topics you'd like to hear about. Feel free to leave a comment or send a DM. Your feedback's always appreciated. Please don't forget to click the subscribe button, leave a like or comment, share with your friends, and follow me on Instagram. It really makes a difference. Thank you so much.